Hello, everyone. Canadian Citizens for Charter Rights and Freedoms members from coast to coast. It's good to have you with us on another session of In Hot. Recall that In Hot is a fighter pilot term that we use in fighter pilot land to describe a situation where we've been cleared in hot on a target with weapons fully loaded and ready to go. And today we're in hot on the question of following orders. That's the question that police officers are being asked to face more and more as we get into the second year of the pandemic, and their requirement to carry out the pandemic emergency measures associated with various decrees, mandates, and edicts that have come down from various governments, basically originated from our public health departments. So today we have, as we go in hot, we have two very special guests, very able wingmen. We have with us Erin Howard. She's an active police officer who serves in the province of Ontario at this point in time. Erin is very concerned with the maintenance of her oath of service as she proceeds to enforce these pandemic measures. So concerned is she that she joined the organization Police on Guard for Thee, which is an activist organization of retired and active police officers who are very concerned with what they're being asked to do when it comes to enforcing pandemic emergency measures. We also have with us Nicholas Wansbutter. Nicholas is a criminal defense attorney. He was a former Crown attorney with the Manitoba Department of Justice, and he is now using that skill set in defense of his clients as he proceeds through his criminal law practice. Nicholas is very outspoken on the current status of pandemic measures, and he argues convincingly for the review in light of the Constitution and related criminal law. Now, to start off with, I kind of started off on this this voyage of what the police officers are being asked to do, basically from my own background as a military officer. I've had occasions where I've been asked to do things that I thought were illegal up on the face of it, and had to deal with those situations in a military context, sometimes in a combat context. So that kind of tweaked me and got me interested in this. And then I had an interview with the Honorable Brian Peckford, and Mr. Peckford, in our interview, pointed out something about the Charter being the supreme law of the land. And I'm just going to share a screen here. We can see Section 52 of the Constitution Act 1982 says, the Constitution of Canada is the supreme law of Canada, and any law that is inconsistent with the provisions of the Constitution is, to the extent of the inconsistency, of no force or effect. So I'll stop sharing there. And what he's saying basically is, if emergency measures, doesn't matter what they are, who they're ordered by, but they need to conform with the supreme law of the land, the Constitution, Section 52, and that means being able to justify, demonstrably justify that these measures are indeed needed and necessary for them to be legal. Now, that kind of leads us into our first question, and I'll just do another cutaway here. And these questions, by the way, we've come from the Police on Guard for Thee and their national organization. They've actually gone out and canvassed their members for questions that they would like to have discussed in this type of a forum, this kind of a video panel. And we've C3RF, our organization, Canadian Citizens for Charter Rights and Freedoms, has partnered with them in this endeavor. And their first question is, in Ontario, the Emergency Management and Civil Protection Act clearly states the legislation is subject to the Charter and the Canadian Constitution. There appears to be an obvious disconnect between the law as it is written and how it is presently being applied. Example, arrests at protests, prohibiting peaceful assemblies, whether in public or in private residences, restriction of mobility rights. It goes on, it's a two-part question. Can you discuss the reasonable limits clause? And the notwithstanding clause sections of the charter and how they apply to COVID mandates. I'm going to stop share there, and I'm going to go to Erin, because Erin, you have an oath of service, and I think that oath of service, confirm please, is directed towards the charter. You are obligated to enforce the laws as they are delineated in the charter. And how does, I wonder how you feel about this particular question, and how, give me your impression of what your fellow officers talk about around the water cooler, in the locker room, in the ready room, before they go out on duty. What is the general feel about what you're doing with regards and with respect to your oath of service?
So yeah, you are correct. We did swear an oath to uphold the Constitution above everything else. That's what we follow. In regards to these arrests at protests, mobility rights, asking people out on the street why they're out in lockdowns, I'd say the majority of us don't agree. We don't feel that is our job, and we do feel that it is a breach of the charter, a violation. Unfortunately, I also don't think that people don't feel powerful enough to necessarily stand up and say something. I would say the majority of people that I work with, will do their absolute best to avoid arresting somebody at a protest. None of us want to stop people and ask why they're out. So we just outright don't do it. It's not all of us, obviously. There are people who just don't, or other officers who don't seem to understand as much as the majority of us do. But we're put in a really tough situation. It really seems like no matter what we do, we're going to be criticized heavily. If we do something, you're going to have this side that says, well, these are our charter rights, and obviously they're violating them, and that's how I feel. I do not want to violate anybody's charter rights. I have not done it so far, and I will not do it. But then you have the other side who, if we don't do something, you're always on video, and they're saying, well, they came and they didn't do anything. So we're put in a really tough situation. But I would say overall, at least with the people that I work with, none of us want to go out and violate people's rights. I just think that police officers need to have a better understanding of our jeopardy if we do end up violating people's rights.
I wonder, along those rights, it seems like I think most police services in Ontario anyway work in a union organization or a union environment. You found it necessary to go to police on guard for thee to express these concerns and these worries. Where do the unions stand in all of this? Are they speaking out on behalf of this majority that you're talking about?
They are not. I would say for the most part, they're almost silent. Recently, just with my own experience, kind of what I was told was that our association really can't do much other than grieve something that is in direct violation of our collective bargaining agreement. So that was what I was told, and it seems like everything is all okay. In our collective bargaining agreement, there isn't much that they can grieve in regards to what's going on and what we're being asked to do, which was shocking to me.
Maybe this is a good time, a good segue to ask Nicholas for his thoughts on this, because it looks like your bargaining agreement is kind of superseding and taking supremacy over the charter. Nicholas, what do you have to say about this with regards to the charter, section 1, and the other part of the question was the notwithstanding clause? How do these facets play into this?
Right. Well, thanks, Russ. So the Charter of Rights and Freedoms has built into it section 1 that allows for reasonable limits on any of the freedoms that are listed in the charter, as so long as those reasonable limits can be demonstrably justified in a free and democratic society. So in normal times, this makes sense. I mean, you can't have absolute rights. There have to be some limitations on that, because there will always be circumstances where one person's right will infringe someone else's right in such a way that there's harm. The example I've often given, it's admittedly a bit of an extreme example, but I think it makes the point, is religious liberty. If religious liberty were unlimited, then in theory you could have people who belong to ancient Aztec sun god worship, who kidnap people off the street, murder them and cut their hearts out and sacrifice them to the sun god, and then say, well, I can't be prosecuted for murder because of freedom of religion. So obviously you can't, in a free and democratic society, you cannot tolerate that sort of unlimited level of religious liberty. So the same applies to any other right under the charter. Same applies to even freedom of assembly, freedom to gather, even privately. So the Supreme Court of Canada has laid out a test of how do you apply Section 1. And I think it's important to see how that's applied, because it's certainly not easy for the court to or for the government to override people's rights. There's a careful analysis that has to happen. In the case that talks about that is Her Majesty the Queen and Oakes. That's spelled Oakes. So in order to establish that the reasonable limit is demonstrably justified, there's a two-part test. So the first part is the government has to show that the law that they've instituted that's restricting rights has a goal that's pressing and substantial. That's the word used, or the phrase used by the Supreme Court, quote, pressing and substantial, unquote. So the law has to be both important and necessary. So it has to be something that's really connected with the safety of people in Canada, or the proper operation of a society. So then if they're able to establish that the infringement of rights is to deal with something that's pressing substantial, then the second part is there's a proportionality analysis. So that infringement of rights has to be proportionate to the evil that is being sought to be prevented by that infringement of rights. So the government would have to establish that the law that's limiting someone's rights is connected, rationally connected to the purpose. So in the context of COVID-19 type of laws, you'd have to show that, first of all, COVID-19 is a pressing and substantial danger to Canadian society. And then they would have to establish that prohibiting people from gathering is rationally connected to stopping the spread of that. But then perhaps more importantly, once there's that rational connection established, they need to show that the provision would minimally impair the violated charter rights. So the government has to make laws in such a way that they impact people's rights to the absolute minimum extent necessary in order to achieve the goal, and that the effects of that impairment have to be proportionate. So you can't like take a sledgehammer to kill a mosquito type of thing, because you're going to do more damage to the wall smashing a huge hole in the wall to get the mosquito. So it's kind of the same type of thing. So there should be this analysis. Now, that's the law in theory. And I think we have to be aware of, there's a difference between the law in theory, and then there's also how what the practical reality is on the ground. And the practical reality on the ground, in my view, is that governments really don't care about the charter. They're just doing what they're doing. Now, maybe they think that maybe their science advisors are telling them that, yeah, you have to do this, otherwise everyone's going to die. 2 years into this, I don't really see how they can still be claiming that. Now it seems like damage control, that, well, we've done this for 2 years. We can't admit we were wrong, so we're just going to double down on this instead. I think there's also, people need to realize that although there is Section 52 of the Charter, as you pointed out, that laws are not of no force and effect if they violate the Charter, that doesn't mean that each individual Canadian gets to decide whether something violates the Charter and just say, well, I'm just going to ignore the law because I think it violates the Charter. There still has to be a rule of law, and there's a presumption that unless a court has struck down a law, that law is still, it's a good law. It's kind of that's the starting point. It's assumed that the law is appropriate, and then it has to be dealt with in court. Now, the difficulty that we're having in today, and again, this is purely the practical reality of the situation as I see it in cases that have been decided thus far, is the courts are giving extreme and undue deference to the chief medical officers of health. They're saying, okay, say the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms, they've brought a number of cases. They brought fantastic experts. I'm thinking first and foremost that comes to mind is the case in Manitoba over religious freedom. Dr. Bhattacharya was one of their main witnesses. He absolutely annihilated the Manitoba government's expert witnesses. But at the end of the day, the court said, well, the court can't second guess chief medical officers of health. Therefore, we're not going to strike down this law. So, that puts us in a very difficult situation where, there's been talk of there being a mass psychosis, and actually a high profile criminal defense lawyer, Patrick Ducharme from Windsor, recently came out saying this. I mean, he's been a lawyer for 40 years. I mean, he knows the law inside and out, and he talked about there being kind of a mass psychosis that large numbers of people have just been convinced of this concept that a disease with a 99.98% survival rate is this pressing danger that warrants essentially burning down all the institutions that have made Canada what it is.
Wow. But that's amazing, Nicholas. I mean, if there's any ever a time to really bring to the table all the evidence that is available to prove a point, whether it's for the pandemic measures or perhaps against them, it would be now. It seems like we're not getting all the evidence. I see a number of organizations, Police on Guard for the Mounties for Freedom. They're saying investigations are not allowed to be initiated to establish this evidence, and evidence that is out there, perhaps from Bhattacharya and other experts, is being disallowed or is being poo-pooed as we can't. It's like the courts are acting as servants of the state, and they're saying, well, we just cannot go against the public health officers of the land. But in the meantime, if you look at things on balance and from an evidence-based perspective, we can see easily that perhaps there's much more damage being done by these pandemic measures than they are resolving or solving. And I don't. Where is the check and balance here? If we have say a mass psychosis that's in play here, where is our check and balance? Is it with the notwithstanding clause? Is it with people refusing to comply? What avenue do we have left to us, Nicholas?
Well, I think you've touched on it. What avenue do we have left for us? I think, frankly, it's mass non-compliance. Now, I don't recommend that people break the law, and in fact, it's an offense to recommend people to break the law. But in terms of non-compliance, I mean, people stop living in fear. Turn off the TV and take your children out of the government schools that are teaching them to live in fear and making them wear masks and all that. Just start living your life. I think that's the way that this stops. That people just start. I mean, that's what's going on in the United States right now. I have lots of friends in the United States, and talking to them, I mean, probably about 40 out of the 50 states, people down there just said, "I've had enough. I'm living my life." And the government basically, I mean, in the face of the vast majority of the population just living their lives, the government's, well, they're just leaving it alone, or they're pretending it was their idea to lift restrictions. Okay,
that's very, very interesting, and maybe it's a good time to adjourn to our second question here. So let's take a look. Let's do a screen share here again. I'll highlight, and it says, could officers be subjected to criminal or civil liability should a court ruling eventually, I suspect, determine COVID policies, mandates, etc., are found to be unconstitutional? Is there case law that applies here? And what I'd like to do is I'd like to go over to take a look at a little bit of a video clip here. Looks like Ontario Provincial Police, where they're arresting a mother, I believe, because she didn't comply with vaccine passport restrictions in a public rink.
We are not trespassing.
Yes, you are. You already told me you are. Really? Hey, you know what? It's not worth it. You got that off. Put your hands back. Okay? Don't resist it. There. Put your hand here. We've asked you twice.
Maybe I'll just stop it there. It's a pretty sad scene of police arresting a mother in front of her children crying. That particular video, I think it went worldwide, and you know, it really puts Canada in a not so favorable light, I guess, when it comes to our police officers. So, Erin, I'd like to ask you, you know, with that in mind, I mean, the question is, are officers subjected to criminal or civil liability should a court ruling determine COVID policies are found to be unconstitutional? I think that is a good question for Nicholas to dig into. But for yourself, I'd like to know what your fellow officers are saying with regards to this type of a situation, and I'd like to get your thoughts on public trust. I mean, for police to be effective, they have to have the trust of the public. They have to be seen to be operating fairly. When you see videos like this, what do you and your officers think and say?
I can't speak for everybody, but I can speak for myself. I've seen that video a few times and it's awful to watch. Personally, as officers, we do have discretion. So, you know, we understand what trespassing is. We understand what's kind of going on in the world today with regards to vaccine passports and requiring, you know, businesses requiring people to produce them, and thus they have to then produce their private medical information. And I would say the majority of officers, I would have to hope that they would watch that video and find it disturbing and think that there would be a different way to deal with that. I know personally, I would have dealt with it differently. You know, I don't know about all police services. I know for myself, for our service, we're not really required. We've been told we will not look at vaccine passports. That is not our job. It's the job of bylaw or the health department. We're only to attend a situation for an elevated instance. So if there's a disturbance, a fight, if things are getting escalated, obviously then we're to attend, but we aren't to attend just to simply remove somebody because they didn't produce their private medical information. So personally, that was me. I would say that, you know, at that point, it's a bylaw or a health department issue, but it isn't a police issue.
Okay. How do you find any? Is there any difference out in the field in your interactions with the public? Are you seeing a different kind of attitude expressed by the public towards you as a police officer over the course of these pandemic measures?
So I fortunately work in an area that is very police friendly. Not all areas of my service are like that. Other areas are a lot less friendly, but I'm lucky to work in a really nice area. But I've brought it up to our service several times that, you know, at the end of the day, if this is found to be, you know, against the charter, unconstitutional, if the things that have been put in place were found to be wrong, we as a service are probably in a lot of trouble because the public trust is probably fairly low to begin with. And I think at the end of the day, if that were to happen, I don't know if we could come back from that, and the amount of danger that it would put us in as officers it's horrible to think about, but it's definitely something to worry about. And I'm sure I'm not the only officer who thinks about it.
Well, I think Nicholas kind of approached that in his answer to the first question when he said institutions, Canadian institutions are being eroded and brought down as a result of what is happening. To you, Nicholas, the question is, perhaps it's moot because the question is if the courts find that these COVID mandates are unconstitutional, our officers, could they be subjected to criminal or civil liabilities? It sounds like the courts, if they're acting as servants of the state, that's not quite likely. But in the event that it did happen, would there be feedback back on police officers from a criminal or civil liability perspective?
Short answer is no, I don't think so. In order to personally hold a prosecutor or a police officer liable for actions that they've taken that were in violation of the charter, you have to prove that there were malafides, or like bad intention and malicious intention on the part of the police officer or the prosecutor. I don't see that being easily proven, or how, I mean, how do you prove it at all, right? You'd have to have some sort of evidence that this officer knew that it was wrong and just decided to go ahead anyway. Whereas every single officer would very easily be able to just say, well, look, this was, at the time, it was a valid law that had not been overturned by the courts. It's not my job as a police officer to interpret the law. It's my job to enforce the law. Therefore, I was in good faith enforcing this law. So, I mean, that I don't think any officer, certainly not in the current paradigm, would be held accountable. And I mean, that comes back to the practical versus an ivory tower type of view of the law. I mean, the practical is, in a country where every single level of government and every single person in government pretty much is in full approval of what's going on, you can't expect anything to go on. I mean, we essentially, in my view, we live pretty much in a single party state. Notionally, we have multiple parties, but they're all in 100% agreement, 100% lockstep with each other on the issue of COVID-19, lockdowns, vaccine mandates, etc. So at least in regards to that topic, we essentially live in a single party state. And what's happened in any other single party states? I mean, I'm probably going to mention this a few times during this video. There's a fantastic book that I think all law enforcement have to read. It's called Ordinary Men by Christopher Browning. And it looks at German police. Specifically, it looks at one reserve police battalion in the German police during World War II. These were ordinary men. They weren't diehard Nazis. The majority of them didn't even belong to the Nazi party, just regular police officers, and how they became involved in horrific atrocities, mass murders, because they're told to. And I mean, nothing happened to any of them while the Nazi regime still stood. It was only after the Nazi regime fell, when they lost the war, then people were held to account. Well, we're really in a similar situation here. As long as the current regime we have stays intact, no one will ever be held accountable, because it's all the same structure. That regime would have to fall in order for anything, you know, in practical terms, for anything to happen. So, I mean, that doesn't mean that police should just wantonly infringe people's rights. I think there's, you know, the law as the law, but there's also a moral aspect, and police officers need to look at themselves in the mirror each day, and they need to live with themselves with the decisions they make. And again, going back to those German police, when they were ordered to execute civilians, there were most of the police didn't do it because they hated these people. Most of them, believe it or not, they said when they were interrogated after the war that they did it because they didn't want to hurt their career advancement, and they didn't want to look bad in front of their comrades.
Yep.
They weren't even being threatened with being thrown in a concentration camp themselves or being shot. They just didn't want to look bad in front of their comrades or hurt their career. And so, you know, it was only the ones with real moral courage who just said, nope, I'm not doing it.
Yeah, I think that was in the order of about 10-20% were the ones that said that they just couldn't do it. Lieutenant Buchman, I think, was one of them. And so it comes down to, is there a time when things, I know in the military, we have something called illegal, and we just discern that as from manifestly illegal. And in our Queen's regulations and orders, we say that basically, if you're given an illegal order, you're expected to follow through on it. But if you're given a manifestly illegal order, like shooting an unarmed child, you're not. And so is there a point where, I guess if the regime stays intact and no one's going to have to be taken into account for this, is there a time and a place where things become manifestly illegal, as was the case in early 1940s Poland and Russia with the German order police. I guess that's up to each individual's conscience, I guess, is what it's up to.
I think it is. I mean, to me, each individual in their own individually formed conscience, they need to determine what is the hill that they're willing to die on. Because I think you have to realize that we've been fortunate enough to live in a society where having principles really hasn't had consequences, because people have been allowed to have different views. They've been allowed to have their different principles and hold to those principles. And there's really no consequence to it, because there's been a, live and let live and multiculturalism, and people are allowed to have principles. Now we're entering into a time period where your principles have consequences. So now, and I think that's really coming into effect when, if you're given an order that you believe is unlawful, you, in my view, morally, you have to do the right thing, even knowing that there will be negative consequences for that.
Yeah. I guess at the end of the day, maybe the only check and balance we have here is our oaths of service. When I was in the military, I had a Queen's Commission and promised to follow through on the Queen's directives and instructions. And the Queen, she in the commission scroll, she doesn't talk about me or I. She talks about we and us. And in that Queen's Commission, I took that to mean she's a representative of the people of Canada. So I was taking an oath of service to the people of Canada, not any particular government, liberal, conservative, or otherwise, but the people of Canada, and through representative democracy, through the people that they elect to represent them. So I guess maybe that's the oath of service is it's the last little check and balance we might have here, but that's very interesting. And I too would recommend that book, Ordinary Men, as very, very instructive.
I just want to quickly
Erin, go ahead.
That we already have seen early on, and I think it was the first lockdown, when Dougie Ford came out and said that he was giving us all these special powers to pull people over or to stop them on the street and ask them why they were out and et cetera. Yeah. You did see like basically every police service in Ontario stood up and said, absolutely, we do not have powers to do that, and we don't have that authority, and we won't be doing it. And they did that. For some reason, now, we're much further ahead in the timeline, and we have stuff happening, but no service is standing up anymore. So I don't know, like, what the difference is, or, obviously politics are playing a huge role, and they shouldn't be with police services, but they clearly are. But it has happened. They have stood up once and said, no, I'm not sure what the next line will be when they'll stand up and finally say no again, or at least open an investigation.
Sorry, Erin, that was a ray of sunshine. I recall that, and I thought, man, this is people following through on their oath of service, and that was so good to see. But as you say, it seems to be changed a little bit. Maybe Nicholas's reference to mass formation thinking or mass psychosis is setting in more and more as we go deeper and deeper into this pandemic. But I'm not sure. I'm not sure what's the case there. Perhaps we can move on to question number 3 on what criminal offenses, if any, are being committed in relation to forced mandates. I think we've already covered that, so maybe we'll just move on to the next question, and that's question number 4. If a police officer is unsure of his order, then he has the right and yes, duty to request his supervisor to provide him with that order in writing and stating the lawful authority in order for that officer to be assured he is within his legal rights to enforce this order. Do police have discretion? First part of the question. And second part is, can they be forced to break the law? So I'm just going to highlight that and stop share for a second there and move on to, I'd like to show another video clip here. Took place in last New Year, about almost a year ago to the day. It was in Gatineau, and I guess a neighbor snitched on a household of 6 people who were enjoying New Year's Eve, and this was the result.
No, Sealer! No, sir! Fuck you! No, sir! Fuck you.
Well, enough of that. And I think we see there that when I look at that video, I wonder how the police who or the authorities, police authorities who told these particular officers to go out and check the situation out, they even thought that it was a good idea to do so on New Year's Eve with 6 people in a house and enjoying themselves, basically tax-paying, law-abiding citizens having the police bang down their door. I also note that it looked like the police officers didn't even have masks on, so it looks like it was a bit hypocritical. But Erin, what do you have to say about that? And the if a police officer is unsure of his order, and do you have the discretion to ask for the order in writing and refuse the order? Do you have that capability?
Yeah, absolutely. If you're unsure of something, you absolutely have the ability to go to a supervisor and request clarification. You know, we document everything as police officers. So obviously any clarification that we receive, whether it's in writing or whether it's verbally, we document it. You know, I put it in my notebook that, you know, at this time I asked this question and to so-and-so, and they replied in this way. And we absolutely do have discretion. And that's one thing that, you know, from the people that I work with, I see them using it all the time. I don't see us getting into situations like the one on the video that you just showed. None of us want to. I think that police need to think about their own liability and things. You know, if you go knock on somebody's door because, you know, their neighbor reported that they think there's more than the allowed number of people in a residence, and you get into, you know, some sort of tilly with the people inside of that residence, you know, what was your authority to be there? You need to look at things like that. Like, do you really have authority to be there, to get into trouble, to, you know, get into a physical altercation? At the end of the day, is that, you know, going to hold up in court that, you know, a neighbor called and thought there was an extra person in a residence? I think that, you know, that there's where police need to use their discretion and think a little bit before they just go running in.
Well, I think discretion is certainly the better part of valor when we're looking at situations like this and dealing with law-abiding citizens who are, I don't know, enjoying a New Year's Eve celebration. Nicholas, for yourself, how do you see this situation with regards to the police? Is there any advice that you could give that with regards to things that they could do or ask for, right, to help them with their discretion?
Well, I mean, let me preface my comments by just commenting briefly on the 2 videos that we watched. I didn't mention the first video either, and I'm sure that this view will be unpopular with a lot of people. But even if police are acting unlawfully, the citizens themselves also have a duty to behave in a decent manner as well. And the first video with the lady getting arrested at the hockey arena, mm-hmm. I agree with Erin that the police certainly could have found other ways to deal with that. It wasn't necessary to put her in handcuffs or drag her off. But on the other hand, it wasn't necessary, or in my view, appropriate for her to stage a public protest and bring her children and use them as pawns in this public theater to try to show how awful the vaccine passports are. I mean, at the end of the day, that case wasn't actually really a vaccine passport situation. It was a trespassing situation, and private businesses are allowed to ask people to leave. And if people are being obnoxious and disrespectful and not leaving when they're asked to leave a private business, regardless of vaccine passport, those businesses are entitled to ask them to leave. And when police come to enforce that, you should be leaving. So, you know, one thing that I'm seeing, unfortunately, and I think this is a huge problem, so I have to segue a little bit to talk about this, is I start seeing people drifting into this sovereign citizen, free man on the land, common law, not in the real definition of it, but this made up nonsense sovereign citizen definition of common law, where people think they can just act like completely disrespectful idiots and ignore the law. And they say, like, really, none of the laws in Canada even exist. I don't have to pay taxes because I didn't consent to taxation, etc. That's bad too. And 2 wrongs don't make a right. So I situate it in that. I think that's something to keep in mind. So going then to police, say they're called to respond. I mean, hey, this could probably be happening this coming weekend, right? Unfortunately, there's a lot of people. I mean, this is one of the worst things that's come out of COVID is the whole snitch culture of people calling on their neighbors to denounce them to the state that they have 11 people at their Christmas dinner instead of 10. So police may well get calls like that. It seems to me that police do have discretion of how they deal with that situation. I actually don't know the inner workings of whether you can get in trouble for declining to respond to a certain call, or if the decision on priority of calls to respond to is dictated to officers. But say an officer attends, the officer could knock on the door, and if no one answers, they've satisfied their obligation of going to investigate. They can say, I responded to the call, knocked on the door, no one answered. I have no authority to enter that residence without a warrant, so I'm going to carry on to the next call. Or officers certainly have the discretion to issue warnings, to talk to people. I mean, let me give you an example. I won't say where this happened or what police service it was, but in the context of a religious service I was at, police showed up because there'd been a complaint, and the officer just said, look, we're just here because we received a complaint. It's our duty to advise you there's been a complaint, but it's Sunday. We're going to assume you're following all the rules because we have no evidence to suggest you're not. Have a good day.
Yes.
I mean, police have the option to do that. I mean, going and knocking on someone's door is not actually a violation of their rights. There's what's called an implied invitation to knock. Any member of the public, be they police or civilian, can go up to your door and knock on the door. It's your choice whether you answer the door or not. And I guarantee you, well, I think I'd be safe to guarantee no police officer is going to kick in someone's door to see if there's 11 people at Christmas dinner. I mean, I'm sure there's some officers who totally believe in all the COVID stuff and are scared of it and think, we really need to, put the screws to people that aren't following it. But even those officers, I can't possibly envision any of them kicking in someone's door if they don't answer the door. So, I mean, there's some responsibility on police. There's also responsibility on citizens. I mean, know your rights. Understand that you don't have to answer the door if you don't want to. So make the police's life a little bit easier and don't answer the door. I'm sure a lot of officers would probably be really happy if they ring the doorbell, no one answers. Okay, good. I can sign off that call that I checked it out and carry on. So, I mean, we need to work together a bit too, right? I think, there's a whole divide and conquer thing, and I don't, there shouldn't be divide and conquer. The vast majority of police are good people trying to do good work, trying to protect society. So let's be, as citizens, let's be respectful towards them and try and make their lives a little bit easier too.
So I think what you're saying, Nicholas, is try to push back against this fear culture that we're dealing with,
Yeah.
and start to rely more on our what we know of our situation. That the police are there to help us. That the public trust is important between the public and the police, and we should not let it erode. Through this mass formation thinking that we're dealing with.
We shouldn't let it erode, and we shouldn't let us make enemies of each other, because see, that's another issue I have with videos such as the ones that you showed, is they're extreme instances that would not apply to 99.9% of police officers. But when people are seeing these things and Rebel News is playing it, it starts making people unjustifiably mistrustful of police, and then that kind of turns up the heat a little bit more, because now their next interaction with police, they're thinking, oh, these fascist jerks. I just saw that video where they arrested that poor woman, and an interaction that could have been respectful, now all of a sudden it becomes something else that it didn't need to be.
Yes, indeed. And that it seems like this culture of fear that we're dealing with is whether intentionally or not, is really working against that public trust, and maybe it is time for people to start to come together with the police as a common force to maybe start asking for some evidence, maybe start asking for some justifiable demonstrations that what is taking place is really necessary and really part of the of what is best for the country and its communities.
Russ, I'm sorry to jump in there, but I actually have a burning question. It's in my mind. Our questions have all been focused on what will happen to police if they follow these orders. You know, will they be held accountable? My question is, what would happen to a police officer if they declined to, you know, say they were told by their sergeant, okay, you have to go break up this party? What would happen to an officer if they just said, with all due respect, sir, I don't think that's a lawful order. I'm going to go respond to that robbery call over the air instead.
Okay, over to Erin.
Well, I think, again, it's discretion. So, you know, if my sergeant says, you know, there's apparently a party down the road and there's too many people and, you know, and it's in a lockdown and you can't have people at your house, I want you to go and break up the party. Again, it's discretion. So if I go there and I knock on the door, like you said, if nobody answers, then I can't see the party. So I don't know how many people are there and I have no authority to go in that house. If I go there and I see a few people and I say to them, you know, hey, you're having this party, you know, these are, and I give them some education and I tell them, okay, this is how many people are supposed to be here. I don't know if you have the right number of people, but I'm seeing a few, you know, so maybe, you know, at this point, yeah, you're going to have to maybe leave. You need to ask your guests to leave. But, you know, I don't know how long it's going to take for those guests to leave. And I'm not going to stay there. And when I've got priority calls coming in and babysit a bunch of people at a gathering in a house, right? So I think a lot of it is just how you go about it. You know, I'm still doing my job. I'm educating them. I'm letting them know what the laws are at this point in time. And you know, I've asked them to leave, and if it takes them an hour, great. If it takes them 6 hours, it takes 6 hours. I'm not going to be there, so I don't know. But every officer is different. But just going back to what we were just talking about, that's what I've been trying to say is the majority of officers that I work with, they don't want to have to do any of this. You know, they want to do their jobs. They want people to be protected. They don't want to step on people's rights and infringe on, you know, people's freedoms. It's just, again, sometimes you don't know the whole situation all the time when you see a video like that. You know, you don't know what happened before the video. You don't know what happened after the video. And as you were saying, Nicholas, I totally agree. We need to work together. Police just, we're not these terrible people that everybody thinks we are. Yes, there are a few bad eggs in every service. That's in any industry, not just policing. So I think if you know, the public can start to trust us a little bit and work with us, they would actually find that, you know, we can help. It's just, we're all fighting the same enemy at this point in time, and that's this pandemic and figuring out how we get out of where we're at right now.
How do you feel about the pandemic? Do you feel there has been enough investigations ongoing, Erin, with regards to determining whether these measures are demonstrably justified or not? Are you satisfied with that enough has been done to make it known or prove to the people at large that these are really required?
Personally, no. I have brought this up to my service. My association, numerous times now, asking about why we're, as a police service, why we're not actually investigating when, you know, there are clear red flags that are going on. There's things that aren't adding up. A lot of goalpost movement, a lot of things that don't make sense. And you know, I've said it multiple times. If this is what we do, we're meant to investigate. So when something like this is happening, why are we not opening like a real investigation into what's going on? And if we don't do it, who's going to? So no, I personally, I am not satisfied at all that, you know, we have not done what we're supposed to do, in my opinion. And I'm not sure when we're going to do it. I am confident eventually it will happen. I'm just not sure why we can't preemptively start now.
It's not one of our questions, but I think it's extremely important to home in on that, because the whole idea of a police service is to conduct investigations. And from a legal aspect, from a judicial aspect, Nicholas, is there some way to initiate such an investigation? Is it possible given our system?
Well, I mean, it's very difficult because, you know, in a way it comes back to the police discretion and also prosecutorial discretion, and the courts are are only going to interfere with that in the most rare and extreme circumstances. So from a legal court perspective, there isn't really a way to do that, to force the police to do certain investigations. Now, there's nothing stopping people from doing their own investigations or amassing evidence, and there are provisions in the criminal code for private prosecutions to be laid, although those have their own difficulties. And if a prosecution is preferred, or if it's instituted by justice of the peace, the Crown Attorney's Office could pull the plug on it right away. It's you know, and that comes back to the attitude of the courts. It's difficult. You know, there aren't any easy answers to that.
I guess this is where we start to think about the watchdogs of democracy, when we start to think about our press, you know, and their responsibilities to do investigative journalism on behalf of the democracy that we live in. And I don't know about you, but I don't see that happening at all. I see major questions going unanswered and just fluffed over, with very little interest and curiosity being expressed by the press.
Yeah, that's a huge problem. It's a bigger problem today than it's ever been in history because of social media, television. Like, there's just so much media, right? I mean, if you look at times in the past, I mean, you know, again, if we go like Europe in the 1930s, be it Nazi Germany or fascist Italy or the Soviet Union, I mean, what did they have? They had the radio. They didn't have television yet. They didn't have the internet. You know, they basically just had radio and newspapers. So the press didn't have the same level of power that it has now. The press has massive power now, and as far as I'm concerned, our media is. I mean, it's not media, it's propaganda. It's like and I don't know who's controlling who. Is the media controlling the government, or is the government controlling the media, or someone else? It's hard to tell who's in charge, because sometimes it even seems like the government is doing things at the bidding of the media, right? Like in Ontario, for example, it always seems to happen that the media is screaming about numbers and how we need a lockdown and how irresponsible Premier Ford is for not like completely burning society to the ground and putting everyone in concentration camps. Yes. And then it's only after the media has been yelling about that for a while that then Premier Ford at least says he's reluctantly imposing things. Now, I don't know what's going on behind the scenes. Is it the government telling the media, okay, you need to prepare the ground for us by you know, raising the hue and cry about this, so that then we can come in and, well, we're justified because look, the media has told you to be terrified and everyone's going to die. I don't know, but the big problem is there's no investigative journalism. There's no alternate viewpoints. It's just a monolithic one side of the story that's being presented to everyone.
It's a narrative. It's a huge narrative. And to your point, when you talk about Premier Ford, I remember back in the spring, I think it was, where he said he was obligated to listen to his public health officials and do exactly what they wanted to do, because he said if he did otherwise, it would be like putting a rope around his neck and jumping off the bridge. Mm-hmm. I think those are pretty close to his exact words.
Yeah, I did say that, which, I mean, my response would be, well, that's why they pay you the big bucks, to make the tough decisions, Mr. Premier. And yes, he hasn't made a single tough decision, as far as I'm concerned, since the beginning of COVID. It always drives me nuts when he says, oh, this is a real hard decision for me to make. I mean, no, it wasn't. You made the easiest possible decision there was. You did what the media and the medical officer of health told you to do. The tough decision would be to say, no, I'm not violating people's rights. Here's why. And it'd be very easy to do, because he could say, oh, and by the way, here's Colonel Redman, retired, who used to be the chief emergency management guy for Alberta. Here's his entire plan. Here's all the justification why we should do that instead of lockdowns. And that's what they're doing. But, you know, all the politicians are just taking the easy choice, which is do whatever the media and the medical officers say.
Yeah, there's a powerful narrative out there that seems to it must be obeyed, and maybe it's time for the people to get together with the police forces and start pushing back on their own and providing their own little bit of pressure to our elected representatives who are supposed to be working on our behalf. But I think we've you know, I'm looking at question number 5 here, and I think we've really addressed it with our previous discussions. So I think it's probably a good time to bring things to a close and thank both of you very much, Erin and Nicholas. It's been extremely informative. Do you have any last words you'd like to leave us with, Erin?
Words aren't my best thing.
No, they are very good things for you. You've done an admirable job here. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I just hope that, I hope that people can understand that really the majority of police do want to do the right thing, and we don't want to have to enforce any crazy measures that are being put into place. So, if people can just kind of come together and, we go to things and there's no escalation and people are compliant, everything is just gonna we're gonna end up working together. And that's sort of what I'm hoping more to see, because we are all on the same side, and we do want to maintain our rights and our freedoms. I want to maintain mine as much as I want that for everybody else. So, and I know the people that I work with, we all feel the same. So I think we have to find a way to come together a little bit more on this.
Okay. And if people want to get a hold or get more information on Police on Guard for Thee, where can they go?
So there's a website. They can definitely go check that out. You can look it up on Google, on the internet. It's on Facebook. It's on Instagram. We're all over the place. So yeah, we would love that. Go check us out. There's lots of information on the page if they feel like donating. It's a great cause, and we are for the people and standing for the oath that we swore. So we would really appreciate that.
Okay. Oath of service and principles. Certainly things that we need to keep in mind in these days of pandemic measures. In closing, Nicholas, any final words?
I would echo the comments that Erin made, and I would just say, I mean, I'm one lawyer among many, so I certainly don't know every case that's out there, but thus far, I have yet to see a case where someone who is being polite and respectful to police, I've seen very few cases where people who are being polite and respectful to police were charged. I can't say I haven't seen any cases. There's some, and I don't know what those officers, what their thinking was or what their deal was, although part of it could be the context of the wider context of what was going on, where there's certain groups that I think are taking maybe a bit of an extreme approach. So then you get painted with the same brush when you're hanging out with them. I think people should avoid extremism to either end. Avoid the extremism on the COVID, the people that take it to the extent of, I hope all the unvaccinated people die, yes. But also avoid the other extreme of, well, I hate all the vaccinated people, or I want to kill police, or, yes. Again, extreme examples. People should avoid those extremes, avoid the divide and conquer. And the old saying, right? Honey is always going to attract more flies than vinegar will. Yep. And that's how I think the way forward through this is together. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. I understand that a lot of people are frustrated and impatient with things but I think we're all, this is an unprecedented situation for everyone, lawyers, police, any other people. Everyone's trying to figure out, what do we do? Like, how do we get out of this? And so people should avoid anger and accusations and work more on love and Canadian values and sticking together, and I go back to turn off the TV, take your children out of the schools, go to church. Get back to what made Canada what Canada is, and that's how we're going to kind of get Canada back.
Okay, keep a cool head. I agree with that. I agree with that totally. Certainly, there seems to be a lot of scapegoating going on, and you mentioned the unvaccinated. I see on a daily basis, people in the press, talking heads, talking about them like there's some sort of vermin or filth or something. Very, very worrisome. So keep a cool head. I agree totally. On that, I think I'd like to close it out and thank you both again for an extremely informative video panel here. The idea is that with the help of Police on Guard, we'll get this out as far and wide as possible to all the police agencies and authorities that we can, because I think it's a really critical and important discussion to have and to engender. And perhaps ask more people to get involved in. So thanks again, Erin, and thanks again, Nicholas. Thank you very much.
You're welcome, a pleasure.
Anytime.